The music hit you exactly when you needed it most, right in that messy, fragile spot, and somehow it made things bearable. For most people, the song that did it has Stevie Wonder's name on it. 75 years. That's 3/4 of a century. Stevie started life as a blind kid, born 6 weeks early in a small Michigan town. He went on to sell over 100 million records. He picked up 25 Grammys. His songs feel so deeply wired into our hearts that today's teenagers, kids who weren't even alive when he wrote them, still tear up the moment "Isn't She Lovely" starts, shiver when Superstition comes on, and feel something old and honest stir inside when You Are the Sunshine of My Life plays. Here's the thing though, he didn't just make music, he became music. But, honestly, there's something most people miss. Behind that glowing smile, behind the way he rocks at the keys, and the legend everyone clings to, there's a real story. Not just the greatest hits, but the whole thing. Beautiful, painful, tangled, and so deeply human you can hardly stand it. That's why we're telling it all today. If even one of his songs ever reached into you, past what words could say, drop a like before you keep reading. Not for the algorithm, but as a quiet nod to a man who gave everything he had so the rest of us wouldn't feel so alone. Because this man really did give everything, and most people have no clue what it cost. Let's rewind. May 13th, 1950, Saginaw, Michigan. Stevie Wonder's born 6 weeks early. He's fighting for every breath. The doctors put him in an incubator, pump in pure oxygen to keep his tiny lungs alive. They saved him. No doubt, they saved his life. But that same oxygen destroyed the blood vessels behind his eyes. It's called retinopathy of prematurity. By the time his mother, Lula Mae Hardaway, took him home, her baby was permanently blind. Stevie would never see her face, or sunlight bouncing off water, or autumn leaves, or the look on someone's face when his music made them cry. He'd never see anything. He was less than a year old. Lula Mae was 21, broke, almost totally alone. His father, Calvin Judkins, drifted through their lives like a cold wind, rarely bringing warmth or stability. When Stevie turned 4, Lula Mae packed up her kids and moved to Detroit, searching for some kind of hope. What she found was a 2-room apartment in a tough neighborhood, with thin walls, brutal winters, and dignity that you had to fight for every single day. Almost nothing, really, but even in all that emptiness, something amazing was brewing. Stevie listened to the world in a way nobody else did. Every sound felt alive, full of texture, weight, even color. Floorboards creaking, a neighbor's radio floating through the wall with a ghostly saxophone. His mom humming gospel songs in their cramped kitchen. That humming, the unguarded sound of a young mom who had no idea she was giving her son the roots of genius. That was the first music he soaked up. It stuck with him. Never let go. By age 9, Stevie could play the piano, harmonica, drums, and bongos. At 11, a family friend with connections to Motown took him in for an audition. Motown spotted whatever spark they always seemed to find and signed him instantly. They called him Little Stevie Wonder. He was just a kid, 11 years old. And the music industry, let's be real, not exactly gentle with children, started eating him up. 12. A #1 single, Fingertips Part 2. Live, wild, and electric. If you listen now, you can still feel the shock. This tiny kid taking over a stage. The world lost its mind. At 12, Stevie Wonder belonged to something way bigger than himself. He spent his whole youth recording, touring, performing. Motown handled his childhood earnings in a trust fund. He was the golden boy, polished, packaged, shown to the world. Then he turned 21. This is where the whole story changes. When Stevie hit 21, the contract Motown signed for him as a kid vanished. Legally, the trust was finally officially his. When he sat down with lawyers, he picked himself, his lawyers, for the first time. He uncovered a truth as cold as that Detroit winter he grew up in. The money he expected, it was nowhere near what it should have been. A kid who made millions for Motown arrived in adulthood with way less than anyone guessed. He didn't make a big public scene, didn't rant in interviews, he did something stronger. he went completely quiet. For months, Stevie Wonder, Motown's golden artist, just stopped. No new music, no performances, no talks on their terms. Berry Gordy had to face the very real possibility that Stevie could walk away for good. Here's the thing though, Stevie wasn't just chasing a bigger check. He wanted something wild for a black artist in the early 70s. He wanted total creative control. Write his own songs, produce his own albums, own his masters, actually be the author of his own artistic life. Motown fought back. Of course they did. Their whole system ran on control, cranking out polished hits, giving an artist total freedom went against everything they believed. Stevie didn't flinch. Eventually, Gordy gave in. In 1972, Stevie signed a new contract. Unheard of at the time. Full creative control. Better royalties. He owned the rights to his music through his company, Black Bull Music. This wasn't just a record deal, it was a statement. It changed what musicians, especially black musicians, could hope for in the American music industry. What happened after? Simple. One of the greatest creative runs music has ever seen. 5 albums in 4 years. Music of My Mind. Talking Book. Inner Visions. Fulfillingness. First Finale. Songs in the Key of Life. He played almost everything himself. He wrote, produced, blended jazz, funk, gospel, classical, African rhythms into something with no real predecessor, and honestly, no real successor either. People responded with a kind of awe saved for the rarest talents, but the triumph cost him something more than all the Grammys in the world. And life, just like it does, was about to make sure he knew. August 6, 1973, Stevie Wonder's 23, right at the peak of his powers. Inner Visions had just dropped. Critics were calling it a masterpiece. He was heading through North Carolina toward a concert when a logging truck from the opposite direction lost a huge piece of timber. A log slams into the windshield. It bounces straight into his skull. The people who saw it happen froze with that awful, quiet certainty. Stevie Wonder was dead, or so they thought. He wasn't. But for 4 days, he disappeared into a place the living can't reach. The coma was deep and silent. Doctors hovered around him, speaking in that calm, gentle way that hides more than it shares. Brain damage? Absolutely possible. The man who gave the world Talking Book and Inner Visions hung somewhere between this world and whatever comes after. Lula Mae, his mother, took the chair by his bed and sang gospel songs she used to hum in their little Detroit kitchen. She sang because she believed music was the only thing strong enough to make it through to wherever her son had gone. On the 4th day, a musician friend pressed close to Stevie's ear and started singing his own song back to him. Higher Ground, a song about refusing to let go no matter what. And then Stevie's fingers moved. Like a diver heading for the surface after running out of air, he followed his own music back to the world. He woke up. The whole world breathed again, but waking wasn't the finish line, not even close. The injury wrecked his sense of smell for good. For a man who'd learned the world through everything but sight, that was its own special kind of loss. The headaches were brutal. Recovery crawled forward, painful, uncertain, slow. He wasn't the same man anymore. How could he be? He'd stared right into the void. Not in some poetic way, literally. He'd been somewhere else, and when he came back, he brought back what he'd heard. 3 years after that North Carolina highway nearly killed him, Stevie released Songs in the Key of Life. People call it one of the greatest albums ever made. Some say it is the greatest. A double album, wild and dizzying in its reach, full of emotion, musical complexity, and the kind of spiritual depth that sounds like it came from a place just outside ordinary human understanding. Because, honestly, he did. That's what happened. When the album dropped, Stevie won the Grammy for Album of the Year a second straight time. The Recording Academy still gets tongue-tied trying to explain it. But when something glows that bright, it throws some big shadows. And while the world was celebrating Stevie's genius, some shadows were stretching out behind him. Shadows nobody wanted to see. By the early 80s, Stevie Wonder was more than famous. He was vital. He'd become part of the emotional wiring of the whole culture. If he wasn't involved, It almost felt like the moment wasn't fully real. So Stevie picked a fight no one expected, not for a spot on the charts or for personal glory, but for something that actually mattered: justice. Activists had been fighting for a federal holiday in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for years. Congress kept shooting it down, often for reasons that stank of something ugly and old. Stevie didn't just blend his name, he wrote "Happy Birthday" as the campaign's theme. He played rallies, talked to senators himself, and got 6 million signatures for a petition. He wouldn't perform in states that refused to recognize the holiday, a quiet sacrifice, no big announcements or self-congratulation. In 1983, President Reagan signed the bill. That victory had many parents, but everyone knew Stevie's relentless drive helped finally tip it across the line. Then came "We Are the World," 1985. Stevie stood in the studio with the most famous faces from music. When he stepped to the mic, the room changed. People went from pros to worshippers. That single raised over $60 million, the fastest-selling American pop song ever at the time. But there was a price. Fame collects in secret, interest adding up where no one can see. Stevie's public face always shined, always working, always showing up. But behind it, he was being eaten alive by the weight of being more than just an artist. He wasn't allowed to just make music. People wanted him to be conscience and compass. Every injustice needed his involvement. Every cause waited, quietly expecting something. Meanwhile, his private life was shaking in ways the bright lights didn't show. His first marriage to Sarita Wright lasted barely 2 years. Over time, he had children with different women. Inevitable, maybe, for a man whose time had belonged to the world since he was 10. He loved his kids, that wasn't in doubt. But love doesn't erase absence. And Stevie was absent in a way that only men driven by a single mission can be. There, but not quite reachable. And some wounds are beyond even the reach of fame. Not because fame isn't enough, but because some damage is just too deep, too private. No crowd's adoration gets in, let alone fixes it. He met Kai Millard Morris in the late 90s. She was a fashion designer, quiet, strong. She seemed to get both the public pressure and the complicated private life underneath. They married in 2001, had 2 sons, Kailand and Mandla. For a little while, it looked like Stevie had finally found the calm at home that everything about his life worked against. But with the famous, things are rarely as peaceful as they appear. In 2009, Kai filed for divorce. In the years that came after, a very human story took shape. A man so consumed by music and the world's need for him that those closest to him waited in a silence that hurt all the more because it came from someone famous for filling everything with music. There were money disputes, custody fights that limped along long after the paperwork finished. Children caught in the gravity between 2 people who loved them but couldn't manage to raise them together anymore. Here's a man who wrote, "You Are the Sunshine of My Life." Who wrote, "Isn't She Lovely?" straight from the joy of having a newborn daughter. Who spent decades telling the world that love is the most powerful force humans have, now facing a contradiction that cut right to the bone. Except, when you look closer, it isn't really a contradiction at all. It's just life. The same man who felt and sang about love with mind-blowing depth also failed, like all of us do, to live it out all the time. Genius doesn't spare anyone from being human. And Stevie shared the blind spots and flaws that come with being singularly driven from childhood. He'd written the world's most beautiful love songs, and in the aftermath of his second marriage, he came face to face with a truth as old as pain itself. Even a heart that comforts a billion strangers still knows its own specific brand of loneliness. Let me tell you about Lula May. Some people are so deeply part of our lives that we barely realize the weight they carry for us, until they're gone. Lula May Hardaway was everything. She was there from day one, the young mother sitting by an incubator in a Saginaw hospital, watching her tiny son fight for breath. She didn't know then that the oxygen saving him would steal his sight. Still, she brought him home, blind, into a world that offered no guarantees. And right there, she made up her mind, quietly but with iron certainty, her son wouldn't be defined by what he couldn't see. She sang gospel in their tiny Detroit kitchen while her boy drummed rhythms on the table, making music out of what little they had. Years later, in a North Carolina hospital, when he was close to death, she sang him back from the edge. She was steady, unshakable, the root of every note that ever came out of him. She passed away in 2006. And that changed him. Not the dramatic, meltdown kind of change, but something quieter, deeper. Something slipped away, something irreplaceable. In interviews, you could hear it. A tenderness in his voice that was almost too raw to listen to. She was everything, he'd say. And those words held the kind of grief that doesn't need fancy sentences. But it wasn't just Lula Mae. The losses just kept stacking up. Marvin Gaye, his friend and fellow traveler, was killed in 1984. At the funeral, Stevie wept for more than just a friend. He'd lost someone who understood what it really meant to live at their level. Michael Jackson died in 2009, the same year Stevie's marriage fell apart. Double blow. Then Prince was gone in 2016. Another voice, high in the stratosphere, another soul who didn't need things explained to understand what that kind of loneliness costs. Each one, Marvin, Michael, Prince, left a wound. And wounds don't just add up. They twist around each other, get tangled, start to feel like a way of life. It becomes less about individual losses and more about living with loss as a fact. Then Stevie's body started presenting the bill. The people closest to him talked about it. A tiredness way past tired. A pallor you couldn't see on stage but was obvious off it. A slowing, not in his mind but in his body, which was worn out from carrying so much for so long. His kidneys failed. It didn't happen all at once. It crept up, slow and relentless, until you almost believed it was just getting older. The dialysis, well, that's its own kind of humility. 4 hours, sitting still, while a machine does what your body used to handle by itself. For a man whose power always came from what his body could give, that's a reckoning. There's no glossing it over or turning it into art. He kept it quiet for as long as he could. Then, in London, 2019, he faced the crowd and told them straight. He needed a transplant. He was stepping away for a bit, needed time to heal. The crowd didn't just clap. They made this quiet sound, the kind people make when they suddenly get how much someone means to them. The surgery worked. Recovery took a long time, out of sight. People who saw him said he was different, softer, more thoughtful. Like being forced to stop had given him space to settle into a quieter rhythm for once. And then, the pandemic hit, which, for someone with a new immune system, wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. He had no choice but to retreat. The man who filled the air for 70 years with sound found himself surrounded by silence, maybe for the first time since that long-ago coma in Carolina. He did what he's always done with pain. He created. He called his kids. He wrote music. He let the same hands find the old keys, and let the music give shape to the silence, like it always had. When he finally reappeared, it showed. He was slimmer, movements more careful, the way he rocked at the piano gentler than before. Still him, still Stevie Wonder. The voice, the music, they stayed. But the man looked touched by mortality in a way you couldn't just wave away. Then he made a choice that split people's opinions. He announced, simply and truly, that he was moving to Ghana, not as some poetic gesture, for real. After 70 years, after building a life and a legacy in the US, he'd had enough. Lately, he'd been speaking more plainly about race in America, sounding less patient and more tired. The edges weren't sanded off anymore. Reactions came fast. Some people called him out of touch, accused him of running away. They said he was too rich to understand the struggle he talked about. His answer was clear. He wasn't abandoning America. He was finally choosing himself, his health, his peace. After everything, at 70, he just wanted to finish his life with some ease. 60 years in the public eye. 6 decades spent showing up, giving, fighting, signing checks, putting his name and soul into every cause that called on him. And people were upset that he was finally asking for rest. We build monuments to the people we love, then act shocked if they step down and turn out to be human after all. Monuments don't get tired or sick or carry old losses that resurface unexpectedly. But people do. And at 75, Stevie Wonder is just insisting on being a person. He's slowed down, sure. He doesn't zip around the world anymore, doesn't keep the old pace. But in that slowing down, something about him has come into better focus, something the hurry always hid. Now, his kids are everything. 6. With different mothers, each relationship its own complicated mix of love and distance. Aisha, born in 1975, the girl who inspired Isn't She Lovely? The others, Kita, Mumtaz, Sophia Kailand, Mandla, all carrying the weight and gift of being Wonder's child. Immense talent, occasional absence, always unquestioned love, even if the man himself wasn't always there. He talks about them now with real humility. No grand statements, just a plain admission that he missed a lot, and he can't get those years back. But he's here now, for ordinary moments that never made headlines. More patient, quieter, ready to simply be around, not always needing to be the center. The music hasn't stopped. There are unfinished songs, albums half done. He'll release them when he feels like it, and no one else gets to set that schedule. After a lifetime of being managed, controlled, and marketed, that freedom is more than a perk, it's justice. Underneath it all, his faith remains the same faith Lula May sang over that kitchen stove, the first melody he ever heard. He talks about it now without trying to make it palatable for everyone. He believes in continuation, in seeing loved ones again, in the odd grace of a universe that took his vision but left him with the ability to hear absolutely everything. Here's what the applause always covered up. Stevie Wonder didn't rise above suffering. He carried it. Every part. The blindness, the poverty, the childhood lost to an industry that saw a product, not a person. The marriage that couldn't last under the weight of absence. The mother whose silence was his deepest loss. The failing kidney. The friends gone. The country that cheered him for years and then got mad when he finally put himself first. He bore all of it, and still played. That's not some fairy tale. Fairy tales wrap everything up with a shiny bow. Wonder's story is harder and more honest. Here's a man marked by everything life threw at him, who used those scars to make something incredible, something brighter than the darkness it emerged from. Was he perfect? Not by a long shot. He missed things that mattered. He let his gifts consume him. Failed in the ways that hurt the most. Husband, father. He was, honestly, fully human. And that's exactly why his story matters. Not because he was superhuman, because he wasn't. A blind boy, born poor in 1950, whose life was saved by the thing that took his sight, somehow created the greatest body of American music, not despite his pain, but through it, because of it. The darkness never blocked out the light, it demanded it. Now, at 75, he isn't the Stevie Wonder nostalgia wants him to be. He's older, marked by illness, choosing rest, choosing his children, choosing himself. And in doing that, he's finally living in a way the symbol never could, but that the man, after all he's given, has absolutely earned. He is living, not performing living for public consumption, actually, privately, imperfectly, preciously living. The world gave Stevie Wonder its highest honors. He received them with the grace of a man who understood what they represented, and the humility of a man who knew what they couldn't see. What they couldn't see was the cost. The dialysis chair. The marriages that broke. The children who needed more than fame could give. The mother whose absence left a silence no music could fill. The friends lowered into earth, one by one, until he was the last one standing in a room that used to be full. He once said that music is a world within itself, with a language we all understand. He was talking about what music does for listeners, but he was also describing what music had done for him. It gave him a world within the world, a place where blindness was irrelevant, where loss could be, for the duration of a song, transformed into something that made other people feel less alone. He gave us that world for 75 years. Every note a gift. Every album a piece of a life offered openly to strangers who needed it more than they knew. What we owe Stevie Wonder is simple. We owe him the willingness to see him whole, the man and the music together, the triumph and the tragedy together, the light and the darkness together, because one without the other isn't truth. It's just comfort dressed up as tribute. He was born unable to see, and he spent 75 years teaching the rest of us how. So the next time superstition comes on, and your whole body just responds before your brain even catches up, or "You are the sunshine of my life" floats through a room and suddenly everything feels okay for a minute, remember what it cost him to make it. Remember the boy in the incubator, the poverty, the coma, the divorce, the dialysis chair, the mother's grave, the friends gone silent. One by one, remember all of it. And then let the music play, because it was made for exactly this moment, for when the weight of being human feels too heavy to carry alone, for when we need to be reminded, by someone who had every reason in the world to know otherwise, and chose to believe it anyway, that life, in all its cruelty and all its beauty, is worth singing about. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, because the stories that matter most are rarely the easiest ones to tell, and we'll see you in the next one.